I once again honor your valuable presence and officially open this conference. Our first speaker, Professor Slavi Zizek, has not been able to speak in our online event due to a condition in his health, but he has been kind to send us a pre-recorded video of himself, so it will be played just like that. Thank you very much.
We celebrate the World Philosophy Day every first Thursday of November. This year it falls on November 20. So let's use the opportunity to recall what philosophy is at its most basic. Alain Badiou opens up his true life with the provocative claim that from Socrates onward, the function of philosophy is to corrupt the youth, to extraneate them from the predominant ideological political order. Such corruption is needed especially today in our liberal permissive West, where most of the people are even not aware of the way the establishment controls them precisely when they appear to be free. The most dangerous unfreedom is the unfreedom that we experience as freedom, or as Goethe put it 2 centuries ago, none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. Is the libertarian who works on destroying the thick social network of customs in which he can only thrive really free? Socratic revolution is characterized by 2 features. First, it is a reaction to the general crisis of the Greek social life, which for Socrates is embodied in the widespread popularity of sophists, performers of empty rhetorical tricks who enacted a decay of the tradition of polis. Second, what Socrates opposes to this decay is not a simple return to the glorious past, but a radical self-questioning. The basic procedure of Socrates is the endless repetition of the formula. What exactly do you mean by virtue, truth, the good, and similar basic notions? Today, we need the same questioning. What do we mean by equality, freedom, human rights, the people, solidarity, emancipation, and all other similar words which we use to legitimize our decisions? Thinking means that when we are confronted with the ecological crisis, we don't just focus on saving nature. We also ask ourselves what nature means today. With the rise of artificial intelligence, it is not enough just to ask are machines able to think? We should also ask what human thinking really means. We should follow here Descartes. When he wrote that God could have decided that 1 plus 1 is not 2, this insight is not a regression to obscurantism, but the beginning of modern science, which realizes the contingency of our even most self-evident truths. Let me give a simple but extreme case of what thinking means. On the 12th of June 2025, the Air India flight 171 from Ahmedabad Airport in India to London Gatwick Airport crashed 32 seconds after takeoff. All 12 crew members and 229 of 230 passengers aboard died. On the ground, 19 people were killed and 67 others seriously injured. As the aircraft reached its maximum recorded airspeed of 330 kilometers per hour, 3 seconds after takeoff, both fuel control switches sequentially moved from run to cut off. Both engines immediately shut down and stopped producing thrust. The investigation led to a quite terrifying conclusion. The cause of the catastrophe was neither personal pilot's error nor mechanical, but purely digital, because of some miscommunication between the different parts of its digital machinery. The digital system that regulates the plane was simultaneously informed that it is still on the ground and that it is already in the air. When confronted with such contradictory information, the digital system played it safe, in the same way we would do upon seeing a machine malfunction. Not knowing what really goes on, it decided to stop the machine working. So the digital system didn't thought the plane is still on the ground. It didn't know where the plane is, on the ground or in the air, and consequently deactivated itself. It also prevented the pilots to intervene because it thought that one of them may have accidentally pushed the fuel control button. In short, the catastrophe was caused by the very precautionary measures to prevent a catastrophe. What the digital system was not able to do was a simple decision that even a bad pilot would be able to do. You see that the plane is in the air, so you switch the fuel control to run. One should oppose here the Socratic questioning to the Confucian rectification of names. Confucius' analysis of the lack of connection between things and their names grounds the need to overcome this lack. A quote from Confucius: "If language is not correct, then what is said is not what is meant. If what is said is not what is meant, then what must be done remains undone. If this remains undone, morals and art will deteriorate. If justice goes astray, people will stand about in helpless confusion. Hence, there must be no arbitrariness in what is said. End of quote. In clear contrast to this stance, the Socratic tradition is fully aware that to really think means to think in language against language, and in this way to destroy the ideology inscribed into our language. Already Democritus, the pre-Socratic atomist, took recourse to a wonderful neologism then. The ancient Greeks had two words for nothing, medel and oden, which stand for two types of negation. Oden is a factual negation, something that is not but could have been. Meden is, on the contrary, something that in principle cannot be. From meden, we get to then, not simply by negating the negation in meden, but by displacing negation, or rather, by supplementing negation with the subtraction. That is to say, we arrive at then when we take away from meden not the whole negating prefix, but only its first two letters. Meden is meden, the negation of hen, one, so not one. Democritus arrives at then by leaving out only me, and thus creating a totally artificial word then. Then is thus not nothing without no, not a thing, but an O thing, a something, but still within the domain of nothing, like an ontological living death, a spectral nothing appearing as something, or as Lacan put it, nothing perhaps, no, perhaps nothing, but not nothing. Or as Heinz Wiesmann put it concisely, being is a privative state of non-being. That is to say, being emerges as O thing, by way of subtracting something, the end, from nothing. This is how you think in language against language. It is crucial to note how, contrary to the late Wittgensteinian thrust towards ordinary language, towards language as part of our life world, materialism begins by violating the rules of ordinary language, by thinking against language. Today, the true anti-Platonist sophist is, of course, Donald Trump. On the very first page of his Republic, Plato wonderfully deploys how the Trumpian populists, here represented by Polemarchus, treat their opponents, here represented by Socrates, the narrator. A quote. Polemarchus said to me, to Socrates, I perceive, Socrates, that you and your companion are already on your way to the city. You are not far wrong, I said. But do you see, Polemarchus rejoined, how many we are, of course, and are you stronger than all this? For if not, you will have to remain where you are. May there not be the alternative, Socrates said, that we may persuade you to let us go. But can you persuade us if we refuse to listen to you? Polemarchus said. Certainly not, replied Glaucon. then we are not going to listen. Of that you may be assured. End of quote. This stance of simply not listening to your opponent, if you are stronger than him, is what we encounter today again and again in big politics and even in philosophy. One of the standard critiques of Hegel is that the notion of dialectical progress presupposes the urge to go on thinking, to bring out every consequence of a specific thought or stance. Say, if you are an ascetic, thinking about it will make you realize that asceticism is an egotist stance. You are totally focused on yourself, trying desperately to erase all remainders of pleasure or joy. But Hegel knows this. At the very beginning of his logic, which analyzes the logical order of pure categories of thinking without any empirical presuppositions, he points out that logic is nonetheless grounded in an ultimately contingent act of will, a willful decision to think. An ascetic individual can simply say, okay, I am really an egotist, but I don't care about it. I refuse to think what my asceticism implies. I just accept this is what I am. This refusal to listen or to think is not just one big primordial decision. It takes place continuously in our lives. Those who support Israel simply ignore all the obvious arguments that a genocide is going on there. They just dismiss them as anti-Semitic lies. A similar refusal to think happens to me again and again. When I recently listed arguments for our environmental crisis, the reply I got was a variation of, we are not going to listen to that. Of that, you may be assured. And the brief explanation I sometimes get is that the struggle against global warming is a campaign motivated by dark reasons, destroying the prosperous West, for example. Along these lines, Donald Trump said in his speech at the United Nations General Assembly on September 23rd that climate change is the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world. This stance is grounded in a precise notion of justice articulated by Plato a couple of pages after the beginning that I already quoted, when Thrasymachus says, I proclaim that justice is nothing else than the interest of the stronger. And he goes on to explain how, a quote, the different forms of government make laws democratic, aristocratic, tyrannic, with a view to their several interests. And these laws, which are made by them for their own interests, are the justice which they deliver to their subjects. And him who transgresses them, they punish as a breaker of the law and unjust. In all states, there is the same principle of justice, which is the interest of the government, and as the government must be supposed to have power, the only reasonable conclusion is that everywhere there is one principle of justice, which is the interest of the stronger. End of quote. Is this not again Trumpian politics at its purest? Is this not the justice Trump claims to bring to the Middle East or to Ukraine? And Trump is not alone here. On July 3rd, 2025, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told the European Union's top diplomats that Beijing can't accept Russia losing its war against Ukraine, as this could allow the United States to turn its full attention to China. And an official brief on the talks said, contradicting Beijing public position of neutrality in the conflict, that Beijing might prefer a protracted war in Ukraine that keeps the United States from focusing on its rivalry with China. Illusions about China, the idea that in spite of all its problematic features, China wants peace, global cooperation, or even that China follows some notion of authentic justice, are here irrevocably shattered. China now made it clear that it wants the long, devastating war, destroying an entire country, Ukraine, to go on because peace may hurt the economic interests of China. Such brutal reasoning displayed in public is rather something one would expect from Trump. So a conclusion to be drawn from this is that today we need philosophy more than ever. We need it to survive as humans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Professor Slavi Zizek and wish him a swift recovery. Our next speaker is Professor Frank Ruda from the University of Dundee in Scotland. I invited him to begin his address on the theme of courage. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for having me. It was wonderful to at least see Slavoj briefly. First, the French philosopher Alain Badiou claimed that Martin Heidegger is the last universally recognized philosopher. Philosophers from all sides of the continental analytic divide cannot not assume that Heidegger was a philosopher. Badiou also claimed that after the disasters of the 20th century, and in absence of any valid political alternative to the destructive forms of capitalism that determines the entire planet today, it is more than high time to have a courage to rethink the very fundamental concepts of planetary human existence, in line with, I think, what Zizek just highlighted. But what is courage? In what follows, I will argue that the last universally recognized philosopher formulated an instructive, even though ultimately insufficient, theory of courage that can help in the present situation. Second, what is not frequently mentioned about Heidegger's being in time is that in it one finds a quite refined theory of courage. Heidegger is de facto one of the most relevant thinkers of a renewal of the thought of courage in the 20th century, as in paragraph 29 of Being in Time, a book written in 1916, published in 27, Heidegger addresses a peculiar type of courage, namely the courage to be anxious, the courage of anxiety, in German, Mut zur Angst, a kind of audacious anxiety. Here, courage is not about confronting our fear or a danger. This courage does not have an object. In facing anxiety, courage has an object that is not an object, and this is, as we will learn a little later in Heidegger, because anxiety itself is objectless, different from fear. Fear is always fear of something concrete in the world. To understand what is at stake here, a certain selective reconstruction of some of the book's arguments will be helpful and needed. The designated term occurs in the book's second division, which deals with what Heidegger calls Dasein and temporality, and it occurs when Heidegger thematizes a certain obscuring effect that results from the impact of what he calls the they, das Man. But before we can get to this wording of courage by the obscurantist effects of the they, I want to turn to some elements of part 1 of division 1 that is called the interpretation of Dasein in terms of temporality and the explication of time as a transcendental horizon for the question of being. The 5th chapter of this division is called Being in as Such, where Heidegger seeks to account for what it means in most fundamental terms to be in something, in a world, which is not something. He elaborates first in paragraph 28 the task of a thematic analysis of being in, and in paragraph 29, the second paragraph of chapter 5, he devotes his thought to being there as a state of mind, das Dasein als Befindlichkeit. And what is translated as state of mind in German comes with the connotations of being located somewhere, being situated somewhere. For sich befinden in German means, in English, to be somewhere, whereas Befindlichkeit in German has 2 meanings, at least. To be somewhere, to be located, situated somewhere, and it means the ways in which, so how I find myself in this space, which is to say, it also means, and the state of mind or even affectivity I'm in. In paragraph 29, Heidegger states, I quote, "What we indicate ontologically by the term state of mind, Befindlichkeit, is ontologically the most familiar of and everyday sort of thing. The Mut, die Stimmung, the being attuned, das Gestimmtsein, both the undisturbed equanimity, Gleichmut, and the inhibited ill humor, Missmut, of our everyday concern, the way we slip over from one to the other, or slip off into bad moods, Verstimmung, are by no means nothing ontologically, even if these phenomena are left unheeded as supposedly the most indifferent and fleeting in Dasein. The fact that moods can deteriorate and change over time means simply that in every case, Dasein, us, always has some mood. Dasein always has some mood. It's always gestimmt, unquote. He here highlights that any good mood or any bad mood makes us understand that any being there has a mood, is mooded. There is no being that there that is not mooded. It is the same moodedness, Gleichmut, or mismoodedness, mismood, but whatever the being in the same mood or mismood is, we could say it never misses the mood. Being there is never unmooded because being mooded is the way in which being is there. It is mooded, gestimmt, in Stimmung, attuned, even when it feels badly or out of tune. Being there is mooded in the mild extremes of Gleichmut and Missmut between equanimity and ill humor. This is how being is somewhere, more precisely in a world, namely by being a being that is mooded. That is how its there-ness registers. In other words, Dasein ist Mut, Gleich or Missmut, and Mut is the German word for courage, which is what indicates that being is somewhere befindlich. Mut, courage is mood, is what indicates that being is a being there, that Sein ist da. Third, this is a far-reaching thesis. There's no Dasein without a form of mood, without courage. I quote, "This is shown by bad moods," Heidegger writes, and bad moods is Verstimmung, which can mean detuning, disgruntlement, but also being upset and resentment, or more literally, being out of tune. An instrument, for example, is verstimmt when it is out of tune in German. Bad mood, Verstimmung, blinds Dasein to itself because in it loses the grip on its own being there, on its own Befindlichkeit and state of mind. It's a state of mind that forgets its own state of mind, a mindless mind. Why? Because when there is a bad mood, it takes over and it remains unclear where the bad mood comes from. Does it come from the outside, from our inside, as many self-help experts would tell us today? Heidegger argues that it is precisely here that we can come to realize that this is the wrong question. It's the wrong question because moodedness, being attuned, does, I quote, neither come from the outside nor from the inside, but arises out of being in the world as a way of such being. But with the negative distinction, he adds, between state of mind and the reflective apprehending of something within, we have thus reached a positive insight into their character as disclosure, unquote. We thus realize that the abstract distinction between inner and outer are suspended once we understand that being in the world means that we are beings that are in, and that in which we are is not outside of us. But it is disclosed by our state of minds, by our moods, which indicate that we are in it. In this sense, we do not have a separate inner life that could be understood without considering our being there within a world. Fourth, it is ultimately, for Heidegger, anxiety that discloses, I quote, Dasein's essence as thrown possibility. But how so? Anxiety is, I quote, a state in which Dasein encounters the world at hand as drained of all significance, that significance that Dasein itself projects in its being in the world, unquote. In this sense, anxiety is, I quote, short of death, unquote. It is a symbolic death, to speak with Jacques Lacan, the mortification of all significance and, I quote, a complete collapse of meaning. It lets me see the utter groundlessness of my engagement with meaning, unquote, which ultimately for Heidegger means, I quote, everything is based on nothing solid at all. So nothing solid is at the ground. We encounter an already givenness and almost too much of meaning, even though it is not meaning proper, that covers up all kinds of questions otherwise by always having prefigured answers to anything, always already, and that is what Heidegger calls the they, all too ready interpretations, and therefore too much of orientation on the one hand side. That's our standard state of being in the world. And then, if there is a moment of anxiety, in anxiety, we discover the opposite. A breakdown, suspension, or disappearance of this type of meaning at too much of meaninglessness. There's no pre-given measure for either. We're always already inscribed into the world on the one hand side, too much, and have too much opinions. And anxiety does not provide us with a measure either. And they are perfect, so the two are perfect opposites, as it were. The they is a ground of our locatedness in the world. In anxiety, we experience a form of collapse, a breakdown, that is similar to learning something about a hammer or a car when it breaks down. The breakdown of Dasein is similar, but also different from that of any hammer. The one thing that brings Dasein being there together is a moment where it is taking out of its fallenness, its inscription into our everyday opinions of the they, and where its own flight from itself is stopped and comes to a halt. Being there becomes what it is when there's a break in just being there. I quote Catherine Whitty, this breakdown allows us to see something previously obscure. Heidegger himself in a later work will indicate that Dasein's fallen side, so our inscription into our everyday life, its own opacity to itself, can also be understood as what he, I think, ingeniously calls Wegsein, a being away. And Heidegger defines that, you find that in the contributions to philosophy, defines being away, Wegsein, the Wegsein of Dasein, the being away of being there, as, I quote, the more original term for the inauthenticity of Dasein. So Dasein begins as Wegsein, being there begins as being away. In this sense, Dasein has to come into the being there, into the Da. Once Dasein exists, even if only briefly, its own Wegsein, its own being away, it comes to see itself as Dasein. Then its fallen being away, its Wegsein, can be seen precisely as what it is, as a privation. Privation is Heidegger's term, privation. So we begin with the privation. After its being away has been interrupted and thus goes away. So the being away of Dasein being away is interrupted. Being there is seen as more primordial. This is what I, with Freud, would like to call Dasein's own Fortdasein. It encountered itself when it moves from weg, from away, being away, to Dasein, from being away to being there. With this move, which shows that there is primarily, that the there is primary, even though it appears to be secondary. It appears as primary only by breaking with the original being away. So we are not ourselves. That's my argument, or Heidegger's argument. We are not ourselves at the beginning. We have to break us not being ourselves so that we can become ourselves. We encounter here what appears to be an act of double negation, breaking Dasein's being away, Wegsein, something, I quote Heidegger, comes to light. And what comes to light is its Dasein. What comes to light is that the fallenness, the Wegsein, the being away, implies that Dasein sided with structure, with everyday life, too much, because in it, something in Dasein is structured that is not only structure. Fifth and last point. Anxiety gives us an Aufschluss, that's Heidegger's term, which is not wrongly, but reductively translated as information, because Aufschluss in German also means opening and exposure and insight, more precisely an unlocking. It unlocks Dasein's very own grounds, the ground that will enable Dasein to find and encounter itself. Through anxiety, Heidegger therefore clarifies what it is that motivates Dasein's flight from itself, its falling in the first place. I quote, "The turning away or falling is grounded rather in anxiety, which in turn is what first makes fear possible," unquote. The Abkehr, the turning away, that is falling, that is our inscription into everyday structure, our inscription into everyday opinions. Our being away is a result of a turning away that shows itself in and through anxiety as what it is, as a result that is made possible. So we have certain opinions, we have certain, we are inscribed into the fabric of everyday life. Because we don't have ourselves at the very beginning. Now we can see that even something like fear of, I don't know, immigrants, fear of tigers, fear of any objects in the world is a mode of fallenness. When we fear, we are not there properly, even though we experience the almost proximity of something in a very intimate way. So I'm trying to say, let me say that again, I'm trying to say that even fear is the way in which we experience, in which we articulate our own being away, because what we fear is determined by something that we don't determine ourselves. Dasein structurally, and this means always, flees from itself, Heidegger thinks. And what that means, it flees from it, what it could be. It flees from its own possibilities of being what it is by finding things that it fears so that it can flee something more concrete. So because Dasein, we are free. That freedom is so scary that the regime of anxiety compensates for us not wanting to confront it. For it is easier to fear a thing than that which is, quote, in face of which one has anxiety, which is being in the world as such. That's Heidegger. Fear always has an object and is therefore bound to objectivity. Anxiety de-objectivizes. It is thus never anxious in face of what he calls an entity within a world, unquote, and thereby thus one's boundedness to the world, at least to a certain extent. We detach ourselves in anxiety from the world, but it thus being bound to what seems unavoidably to be, and it unlocks being in the world as such. The wherefore, the in face of which of anxiety is unavoidably to be, and it unlocks being in the world as such, as something that is, let me quote, completely indefinite, indeterminate, in other words. So what I'm trying to highlight is that Heidegger gives us a theory of indetermination, and indetermination can become a praxis. We can make things indeterminate. This indetermination and de-objectification is so far-reaching that all inner-worldly entities become, I quote, not relevant at all, unquote. Anxiety indeterminates, de-objectivizes, and produces a form of detachment, a form of deliaison or unbinding from everything in the world except the world itself, which therefore gains, I quote, the character of completely lacking significance, unquote. That in face of which anxiety is anxious is therefore not a specific place, and it's not a specific object. It is rather a, what he calls a nowhere, and therefore everywhere. And this is why it concerns everything. In short, Heidegger teaches us that it can be productive to be anxious. It can be productive to be anxious, because only through being anxious we question the very fundamentals of the world. But it is not easy to be anxious, because it's far easier to be afraid, to have fear. And once we have fear, there is an economy, there is a dynamic with which we can operate. So Heidegger's idea of courage, the courage to be anxious, to have an audacious anxiety, is a courage that leads us to be indeterminate, to generate a form of indetermination, to question what seems unavoidably given, and what seems to be something that we would never think could be otherwise. So in this sense, and I think in line with what Slavoj Žižek said just a moment ago, we need philosophy. Why? Because it can make us courageous. It can make us have the courage to be anxious.
I would like to sincerely thank to Professor Frank Ruda and wish him all the best. Our next speaker is Professor Jeremy Shearmore from the Australian National University. I invite him to begin his address titled Popper, Critical Rationalism and Its Agenda for Philosophy in 21st Century. Thank you.
Hello, can I be heard?
Hello.
Hello?
Hello, Professor.
Hello. Would you like me just to start?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. One facet of the invitation to contribute to this meeting, an invitation from which I'm most grateful, was to discuss a problem. This also is an issue which is often voiced by critical rationalists, but it seems to me that this request can be problematic just because it is these days particularly associated with an analytical approach to philosophy, something to which I'm opposed. Accordingly, what I will do in this brief presentation is try to explain what I would take to be involved in a critical rationalist approach to theory appraisal, from which I hope will become clear one reason, I think there are many more, but this is just one reason why I think that an analytical approach to philosophy is problematic. What then do I take to be a critical rationalist approach to theory appraisal? What does it amount to? There are 3 steps involved, which I will present, including a concluding remark which spells out what I take to be the lessons directed against analytical philosophy. First, from a critical rationalist perspective, we're faced with problems about how to make sense of the world. These are posed for us by clashes between our anticipations of what things will be like, which are in important ways biologically based, on what things actually turn out to be like. While we should aim at truth, there's no way in which we can be sure that we've reached it. And our subjective feelings of conviction, which may indeed be very strong, have in themselves no epistemological significance. In this setting, our ideas are fallible, including what we should make of respects in which our anticipations of reality don't work out. From a critical rationalist perspective, we should be guided by fallible intersubjective appraisals of these things, where people are aiming at truth. Our own initial biases and mistakes may be corrected by what we can all tentatively agree to be the case. For example, what the outcome is when a hypothesis is tested. What is relevant here is that an individual reports on what they observe when a test is undertaken. What is to the point is what they claim to have taken place, and that this claim passes critical scrutiny by others. While an individual's experiences may motivate them to make such a claim, those experiences themselves don't play an epistemological role. What matters is whether what people say that they've observed passes critical scrutiny. If it does, it will tentatively be accepted as giving us information about the world, but it can always be challenged and corrected. If such a test statement clashes with our prior knowledge, we need to consider what to do. Unless the test statement itself is successfully challenged, we may need to make a revision to our previous knowledge. What it makes sense to do depends on our situation. In some cases, what we need to do may be straightforward. In other cases, we may need to make significant changes to our previous ideas, although clearly we may not know how to do this, and the issue of what to revise becomes part of an agenda for future action. In broad terms here, Popper's view was that we need to try to replace our prior ideas by a new system of theories, which may include statements about initial conditions, which captures what in the past we were able to explain successfully with our previous ideas, which offers an explanation of the refutation of our earlier theory, and which makes additional predictions of things which we would otherwise not expect to occur, some of which are then corroborated, confirmed when they're tested. Popper had discussed a case illustrating this in his lectures, where the orbit of the planet Uranus didn't fit what one would expect given our knowledge of the planet and Newton's mechanics. The problem was resolved by a correction to our background knowledge. The hypothesis was introduced that there was a previously unknown planet, Neptune, with characteristics such that if it existed, this would explain the anomaly. The postulated planet was indeed then detected. Concerning this whole issue, however, it seems to me that Popper made a strategic mistake in that he didn't at once move to offering a reformulation of what all this implied for his earlier, more systematic ideas. That, I fear, was a habit of his. The same thing arose in respect of his ideas about deductive explanation and the idea of so-called fact-correcting explanation. Popper seems only to have offered a general discussion of what was to be learned from the Uranus-Neptune case in unpublished material written in a draft of his intellectual autobiography. The fact that he didn't do this left open an opportunity for Imre Lakatos to introduce some problems for the interpretation of Popper's work. For building on the Uranus-Neptune example, Lakatos developed what was in fact something that in fact was identical to Popper's own view about the issue, but presented as if it was an objection to Popper's work and offered an alternative to Popper, what in fact was in agreement with Popper's own views about this particular issue. To tell this story properly, though, more needs to be said concerning Popper's work. We need here to take a step back to the interwar period and to Popper's interactions with the Vienna Circle. Popper's concerns were close to theirs, but he differed from them on a number of grounds. While Popper wasn't a Kantian, he'd been influenced by the discussion of Kantian issues, and he didn't share the Vienna Circle's sensationalist empiricism. He was also a fallibilistic realist, and he didn't think that metaphysics was meaningless, and indeed was opposed to their and Wittgenstein's preoccupation with meaning. Indeed, Popper argued that some metaphysical ideas had had an important influence on the development of science. He later, it seems, by the late 1940s, developed this into ideas about what he called the role of metaphysical research programs. These were seen as claims about how one should understand the world, which, as he elaborated this in the 1950s, could themselves be critically appraised in terms of their success or otherwise in resolving the problems at which they were directed, but which could also serve to suggest how detailed and testable scientific explanations should be developed. In his postscript, Popper developed his own suggestions about a metaphysical research program for natural science centered around propensities, that's to say, dispositional properties of a probabilistic character. Now, in one session of a 1965 conference held at Bedford College, London, there was a critical discussion of what was at issue between Thomas Kuhn and Popper. Subsequent to the conference, Lakatos wrote a paper which was included in the conference's proceedings. In this, he developed a criticism of Popper, to which I've already alluded. But he also modified Popper's ideas about metaphysical research programs. That he was basing his approach on them was made clear from two early versions of Lakatos's piece. Lakatos offered the idea of a scientific research program. It, in effect, consisted of ideas about a programmatic approach to the development of theories. For example, in response to falsifications of a theoretical system in a particular way. One might look at it as a version of Popper's ideas about metaphysical research programs with the fallibilistic realism removed, and thus as things which weren't open to criticism of the purely theoretical content of the program. Lakatos, however, in line with his interest in heuristics and with reference to an interesting paper by the 19th century philosopher of science, William Whewell, argued that a program might be criticized for its relative failure to generate suggestions as to scientific explanations in line with its programmatic ideas. In my view, the lesson from all this, from critical rationalism, is that one should use Popper's realist approach, supplemented by useful points from Lakatos's interest in heuristics. All this, it seems to me, leads us to a situation in which we see there as being competing metaphysical research programs, each of which has its distinctive problematic, theoretical and empirical, about the current state of play concerning each of which we should, as far as I can see, be able to reach into subjective agreement. Popper discussed metaphysical research programs, but also, for example, in his paper, The Method, the Framework, stressed that provided that we're fallibalists and are aiming for truth, we can hope to learn from one another, even though we don't share our fundamental ideas. His paper, Public and Private Values, brought out that we could expect there to be a continuing competitive pluralism of ideals. And his On Toleration discussed the fruitfulness of exchanges that took place between Bohr and Einstein, which was scientifically productive without their reaching agreement. Well, what he said about objectivity in his Open Society and Its Enemies depicted it as being a product of ongoing dialogue between different views. In my view, all this would suggest that it's misleading to think, after the fashion of analytical philosophy, that some kind of neutral units of analysis are simply available to us or in any sense given. Rather, I'd see these as something that has to be worked towards in dialogue with those who take different perspectives to our own. And that anything which we take to have such a status must be understood as provisional and in principle open to revision in such dialogue. Accordingly, at least in my view, the key elements in critical rationalism include a recognition of our fallibility, an acceptance of the fact that while we are seeking truth, we need to recognize ourselves to be in an ongoing situation of pluralism, and that it is from respectful dialogue in others that we can best hope to learn. If this is the case, we need to be particularly careful of inadvertently assuming the superiority of our own view, in effect, of taking up a form of intellectual imperialism, to which, in my judgment, analytical philosophy is particularly prone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Jeremy Shimore. I would like to sincerely thank Professor Jeremy Shimore and wish him all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Professor Donald Gillis from the University College London. I invite him to begin his address titled AI and Problem of Induction and Demarcation and Aesthetics.
Okay, am I visible now? Hopefully. I do
Yes.
have
your
yeah.
picture. Yes.
Yes, I do have some slides, so I'll try. I want to
No, you can start. We have
screen.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Please share screen.
Allowed to share screen, yeah. And then I want to, that's good. And then I want to show this, if possible, as a slideshow.
Yes. Now we see your PowerPoint.
You do, good.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, then. Well, now I can start. Okay, then. We have just witnessed a remarkable revolution in AI, the deep learning revolution. This started in 2012, and the following decade saw many remarkable innovations in AI, culminating in the release of ChatGPT on the 30th of November, 2022. which is less than 3 years ago, and yet ChatGPT has really stirred things up. The novel neural networks-based AI turned out to have a whole range of applications to industry and commerce. Unfortunately, many of these applications are widely considered to be morally wrong. Consequently, the philosophy of AI now includes ethics. I cannot, in a short talk, give a comprehensive account of all the bad, or allegedly bad, applications of AI, as that would fill an entire book. And indeed, entire books have already been written on this theme. For example, Kate Crawford's book, published in 2021, is called Atlas of AI, Power, Politics, and the Planetary Costs of Artificial Intelligence. Instead, I will discuss just one illustrative example. Now, there are some examples of AI applications which everyone, or almost everyone, would agree are morally bad. An example of such an application is deepfake pornography. I don't think I know of anyone who thinks that deepfake pornography is morally good. However, I thought it would be more interesting to consider an example where there is some doubt as to whether this application is morally bad or not. For this purpose, I have chosen the example of targeted advertising, which will be considered in the next section. So here we have targeted advertising. Is it morally good, or at least morally okay, or is it morally bad? Now, it is possible to do some targeting of advertisements without using AI. But AI has been the key enabling technology, which has allowed the enormous expansion of targeted advertising in recent years. And nowadays, nearly all targeted advertisements are produced using AI. The procedure goes roughly as follows. Huge databases of consumer behavior have been collected by recording the online purchases of individuals, which are made using their computers or smartphones. In addition, individuals can be tracked via their smartphones, and this reveals data about what shops they visit. Deep learning AI systems are trained using this data and come up with models which enable them to predict whether a particular individual is likely to purchase the products of some company and therefore be a suitable target for advertisements for those products. Moreover, further data can establish whether targeted advertisements have been successful by monitoring the percentage of those targeted who have purchased the product advertised. This data can be used to improve the AI models. Naturally, this is only a rough sketch of the sophisticated techniques which have been developed in this area. But it leaves no doubt that the use of AI is essential to nearly all targeted advertising. Without AI, this is the key point, AI is needed for targeted advertising. Without AI, the databases recording millions of consumers would be far too large to be processed by hand, where it is the enormous size of these databases which enables AI systems to learn models which make fairly accurate predictions. But is targeted advertising morally bad? In fact, in the early days of targeted advertising, it was often argued that it would be a beneficial development, not only for the advertiser, but also for the consumer. This is revealed by Cathy O'Neill in her 2016 book. She recalls that while she was working for the advertising startup Instant Media, her office was visited by a prominent venture capitalist who outlined correctly, as it turned out, the brilliant future for targeted advertising. However, this venture capitalist claimed not only that targeted advertising would be profitable, but that it would be welcomed by consumers. So this was the initial idea, that it would actually be a benefit. So what was the argument? That it might be beneficial. So I'm now considering why targeted advertising might be good. And I give an example involving two characters, Miss A and Mr. B. Miss A is an enthusiast for healthy eating and is particularly fond of Japanese food. Mr. B, by contrast, really loves traditional fast food. For him, the perfect meal might be something like a cheeseburger and French fries, followed by a chocolatey donut and washed down with a cola drink. That's not an imaginary meal. You can order exactly that meal from a fast food outlet near where I live. I've never done so myself, but it would be possible to do so. Mr. B regards Japanese food as being uneatable, while Miss A shudders with horror of what she regards as greasy and disgusting traditional fast food. She would never allow any of it to pass her lips. Given this situation, it would obviously be a waste of time to advertise fast food to Miss A or Japanese restaurants to Mr. B. Moreover, it would be very irritating for Miss A to receive advertisements for cheeseburgers, and equally irritating for Mr. B to receive advertisements featuring the delights of Japanese cuisine. Suitably targeted advertisements would be much better for both Miss A and Mr. B. This is the argument. The irritation just mentioned would disappear. Miss A might receive advertisements for Japanese restaurants, which she didn't know about, but which she would like to try, while Mr. B might receive similar advertisements for fast food outlets. All this this is the argument that targeted advertisements are actually good. All this sounds very admirable and harmonious, but of course there might be snags. Mr. B might have been warned by his doctor that he is already overweight and risks developing diabetes, heart problems, and other unpleasant conditions. The doctor has strongly advised him to give up fast food and eat more healthy, though not necessarily Japanese, food. Mr. B is worried about his health and is trying to follow the doctor's advice, but he still suffers from cravings for his beloved fast food. Naturally, the relevant corporations know very well about this craving and will continue to target him with advertisements for fast food, tempting him to disobey his doctor's advice and risk the onset of some unpleasant disease. There are, of course, many other similar examples. Someone might have been a compulsive gambler and lost a lot of money. He is now trying to give up gambling, but his past is known to the advertisers, and he may well continue to receive targeted advertisements for online gambling, tempting him to worsen his already very bad situation. Gambling is a highly profitable industry. These are significant objections to targeted advertising, but there is another extremely serious objection. I think this is perhaps the most serious objection to targeted advertising. Targeted advertising is only possible if large quantities of data about an individual's consumer habits are available to commercial firms. Indeed, such data is regularly appropriated by some firms and sold on to others. It has become part of normal commercial transactions. However, the necessary data can only be obtained by surveillance, and many object to such surveillance as intrusive and invasive of their privacy. The extent of this surveillance is really remarkable, as is illustrated by an experiment carried out by Janet Vertesi and described in her 2014 article. Now, Janet Vertesi is professor of sociology at Princeton, specializing in the sociology of science, knowledge, and technology. When she became pregnant, she knew that she was liable to become the target of marketing companies. Janet Vertesi was also, as a sociologist of technology, launching a study of how people keep their personal information on the internet. This suggested to her the experiment of seeing whether she could go the entire 9 months of her pregnancy without letting the marketing companies know she was pregnant. It turned out that this was very difficult, and attempting to carry out the experiment actually led to her being suspected of criminal activity. It was immediately obvious to Janet Vertesi that she couldn't say anything about her pregnancy on social media, such as Facebook or Twitter. However, she had also to warn her relatives not to mention it. As she says, this is a quotation from her, but social interactions online are not just about what you say, but also what others say about you. One tagged photo with a visible bump and the cascade of congratulations would let the cat out of the bag. So when we phoned our friends and families to tell them the good news, we told them about our experiment, requesting that they not put anything about the pregnancy online. End of quotation. Unfortunately, this request was ignored or forgotten by an uncle who at 7 months sent Janet Vertesi a Facebook message congratulating her on her pregnancy. She was forced to reply very rudely online, denying the truth. Another family member made a similar mistake in a Facebook chat a few weeks later and rather naively said, "I didn't know that a private message wasn't private." However, Janet Vertesi had to take further steps, not involving social media. Now, this is how she describes them. So her aim, you see, is that she's pregnant, but she doesn't want the marketing companies to be able to detect this. So this is what she did, which shows actually a high degree of skill operating with online things. She says, many websites and companies, especially baby-related ones, follow you around the internet. So I downloaded Tor, a private browser that routes your traffic through foreign servers. While it has a reputation for facilitating illicit activities, I used it to visit babycenter.com and to look up possible names. I mean, this Tor apparently is used mainly by criminals, but in her case, she used it to look up possible names for her future child. And when it came to shopping, I did all my purchasing, from prenatal vitamins to baby gear and maternity wear, in cash. No matter how good the deal, I turned down loyalty card swipes. I even set up an Amazon.com account tied to an email address hosted on a personal server, delivering to a locker and paid with gift cards purchased with cash. So these steps she took to avoid detection were really quite complicated. However, these measures, such as the use of Tor, even though they were designed simply to evade marketing detection, did begin to make it look as if Janet Vertesi was engaged in criminal activity of some kind. This became obvious when she needed an important purchase. This was what in the US is called stroller, which I think in English is called a pushchair. It's a device for pushing along your baby or offspring. And this is what she says about this. As I discovered when I tried to buy a stroller, opting out is not only antisocial, but it can appear criminal. So this is where suspicion of criminality arose. She says, for months, I joked to my family that I was probably on a watch list for my excessive use of Tor and cash withdrawals. But then my husband headed to our local corner store to buy enough gift cards to afford a stroller listed on Amazon. There, a warning sign behind the cashier informed him that the store, quote, reserves the right to limit the amount of prepaid card purchases and has an obligation to report excessive transactions to the authorities. Janet Verteser concludes, this is her conclusion, no one, she says, should have to act as a criminal just to have some privacy from marketeers and tech giants. It's time for a frank public discussion about how to make personal information privacy a basic human right, both online and off. A survey conducted in the United States in 2012 revealed that most Americans agree with Janet Vertesi in seeing targeted advertising as an invasion of privacy. 68% of those surveyed said they are not okay with targeted advertising because they do not like having their online behavior tracked and analyzed. This makes perfect sense. How many would be agreeable to personal details about themselves, such as the fact that they are pregnant, or that they were once a compulsive gambler, or that they have an addiction to traditional fast food, to be appropriated by firms for commercial purposes? However, the use of AI to produce targeted advertisements necessarily involves the appropriation of personal details. My conclusion, therefore, is that the use of AI to produce targeted advertisements is a morally bad application of AI. Okay. That's it. Now, let's see if I can. Okay.
Thank you very much. I would like to sincerely thank Professor Jeremy Shee Moore. Excuse me. I would like to sincerely thank Professor Donald Gillis and wish him all the best. Our next speaker is me.
Okay.
My topics about dialogue between Eastern and Western philosophies on the basis of constructing truth in our times. today we are witnessing enormous transformations in the world that are perhaps unprecedented in human history. The world is undergoing fundamental changes every day, or rather we are experiencing developments that often make us all worry about the future in all countries and cities. My dear friend and colleague, Professor Maurice Hamilton from University of Portland, USA, believes that the world today needs care more than ever. But the necessary condition for this care is dialogue. In this lecture, I will try to examine the dialogue between Eastern and Western philosophies to analyze the contemporary situation and to consider this dialogue not on the basis of pre-existing truths, but on the basis of constructing a common truth. For this, I would like to start with Iranian literature. Although this is a mystical story, a neo-pragmatic analysis that can be presented. In Iranian literature, there is a story about a Simor, which Attar Neyshaburi narrated in his book a few centuries ago. The summary of the story is as follows. Thousands of birds led by Hot, a symbol of philosophy, decide to go to the peak of God and see the truth in the form of perfect Simor in order to achieve immortality. During this journey, many birds fail to make the journey for various reasons. For example, the nightingale says that he cannot leave the garden flower, and another bird made another excuse, and finally only 30 birds reach the peak, and they see the perfect Simor is not there. What's happened? They asked Hot, where is the perfect Simor? Or where is truth? We do not see him. Hot replies, look within yourself. You are the Simor together. You have created a Simor or truth together by cooperating with each other. Truth must be created, not formed. Truth must be created, not formed. From this story, we can conclude that each bird symbolizes a philosophical tradition in the East or the West, which, guided by the common concept of philosophy, must create truth, not simply search for it. Today's philosophers must turn to constructing truth instead of discovering it. We know that today neither Eastern nor Western philosophy is able to analyze the complex state of the world and its future alone, and both need philosophical dialogue with each other. We no longer live in McLuhan global village, but a global common room. Today's human problems are much wider and more complex than in the past. And artificial intelligence, AI, has become a pervasive concern for humans on 5 continents. We have no choice but to strengthen our philosophical dialogue in order to better analyze the future of the world, a future in which huge developments are coming in field of technology, the environment, the economy, society, art, and religion. Philosophical dialogue is the only solution to achieve convergent perspective between thinkers, especially in the humanity. The seeds of this philosophical dialogue exist globally in Islamic, Buddhist, and Christian, Jewish, and even African philosophy. Although the foundations of these philosophies are different. Eastern philosophy relies more on intuition and religious and spiritual thought, and Western philosophy relies on science, rationality, and experience. But considering the development in the world today, both are incomplete. Both are birds with one wing, not two. If a philosophical dialogue is formed between the two, the bird becomes complete, and this can help to understand the problems of the world today more deeply. The solution to many problems lies in dialogue of philosophy. This is very important topic. Fortunately, in the present century, dialogues has been formed between empirical sciences, and interdisciplinary thinking has been strengthened. But the question is, can different philosophies and philosophers with different approaches do something similar? The answer depends on the attitude of philosophies toward human problems in this century. As interdisciplinary research is on the rise at universities such as Cambridge and Oxford, is it possible for such a situation to be established between Eastern and Western philosophies? In other words, can the important issues of today and the future of humanity be shared through dialogue of philosophies? These questions arise from our concern for the future humanity. The spirit of the AI and its applications in all areas of private and public life both increases our hope for improvements and erodes our concern. As Slavoj Žižek says, the light that reaches us at the end of the tunnel may not be the light of the sun, but the light of a train heading toward us. Islamic and Buddhist philosophical taught by touching reality through the intuition and analysis of philosophers and mystics, increases our capacity for human life. On the other hand, Western philosophy relies on reason, experience, the scientific method, a hermeneutic approach, provide valuable practical achievements. It can be said that realm of theory and practice are linked to each other through philosophical dialogue. Today, philosophy can analyze the current state of the world well with the help of art, literature, and science. Mankind must, as twin state, take charge of its destiny on a global level, not a national one, because national responses are inadequate. Today's world has become a vast network of human relationships, and human life is shaped by this relationship. It seems that the identity of every human being, it seems that the identity of every human being in the future will only find meaning through entering into this complex relationship. Our goal to create a space for philosophical reflections and thinking about the development and the future of humanity. Today, no one can present the complete version alone. That among the partial and scattered versions, it is a dialogue of philosophers that illuminated paths of human future. Thank you very much. No. Now we invited Professor Reza Gholami from Iranian Wisdom House in Vienna. His lecture title of his lecture, From Problematic to Problematic, the Mission of the Philosophy in Shaping Human Futures. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to appreciate all of you, especially Professor Muhammad Asghari. I hope this conference helps revive the role of philosophy in solving global problems. Now let me move straight to my topic. We stand on the threshold of a future filled with opportunities and threats. Technological advancements, especially artificial intelligence, could be the most important factor in creating change in the coming decades. But the harsh reality is this. We talk about new technologies like artificial intelligence, while we have not yet overcome the challenges of climate change on Earth, and we may even fail in this path. Even from the viewpoint of political philosophy, there are serious concerns. the weakness of democracy, the limits on freedom and justice, and most importantly, the growing fragility of human rights. These political concerns have become more serious because globalization has turned from an idea or perspective into an objective reality, making humans inhabitants of a small village or a single ship. This situation has brought major changes to governance and has confronted the political order of the modern era with serious shifts. However, the discussion is about transformations that can confront human life with changes beyond our imaginations. In this midst, philosophy certainly cannot and should not be a spectator. By proactively confronting these transformations, philosophy can bring humanity closer to opportunities and keep it away from threats. This means philosophy has a hidden but important role, which is to serve as a source of hope. Philosophy creates hope by elevating thought even in the hardest conditions. Basically, philosophy for its own sake is meaningless. History shows that philosophy is for human and, in critical situations, helps people and societies respond to fundamental questions and approach truth. This mutual help has also ensured the growth of philosophy itself and saved it from stagnation and standing still. For philosophy to play such a role in critical moments, it must not distance itself from the context of society. It must hold the pulse of society, especially in the fundamental layer of human minds. Only in such a position can philosophy be problem-oriented. Let me talk frankly. We speak of the need for philosophers to be active and engaged in the face of deep changes in the world. Yet philosophy, by becoming an academic profession and falling prisoner to the industry of article writing, has withdrawn from this role. This is the contradiction we face. If in the past we witnessed the emergence of transformative philosophical ideas, these ideas did not appear only in universities. They emerged through serious conversation, woven into the fabric of society itself, in public spaces, in dialogue with people's real concerns. This is what we miss today. Today, philosophy has become isolated. It speaks to itself in academic journals and conferences, while the world transforms without philosophical guidance, and the great philosophical problems of our time about technology, justice, meaning, and human existence are being decided by economists and engineers, not philosophers. This is a big problem, and this is a profound loss. Philosophers must first put an end to this fragile condition that has brought philosophy to the brink of disappearance. They must step out of the universities and return to the marketplace of human concerns. This is not optional, it is first task. Of course, for philosophers to enter the public space, they need freedom. They need the ability to speak without red lines. They need to cross boundaries that others fear to cross. Philosophers should not face pressure from governments or multinational companies when they speak their critical view openly. They should not be given political labels or attacked for these ideas, for their ideas. This freedom is not a luxury. It is necessary for philosophy to do its work. Without this freedom, philosophers become servants of power, not voices of truth. And then philosophy dies, not just in universities, but in the hearts of people who need it most. A philosopher who is not problem-oriented is not a philosopher. A problem does not enter the philosopher's mind from outside. Rather, it is born in their mind through their engagement with human and society in a dynamic process. Also, a problem is not fixed. The problem itself is constantly changing and evolving, and the philosopher's art is to deeply understand the changing problem. Even a philosopher encounters a problem in their own intellectual habitat, while in the world of philosophy there is no single habitat. On the other hand, every philosopher in their own habitats looks at human and human societies through their own specific lens. Therefore, problems, even if they have the same title, are not identical. To the extent that there are multiple viewpoints on one point, the problem or problems related to that point are also multiple. Philosophy does not try to create one single answer to problems. Each philosophical problem can have many different answers. But what matters is this: which answer helps keep the core of human being alive and strong? This is the real measure. Not which answer is the most correct, but which answer supports what it means to be human. Different answers can all be true in their own way, but we choose the one that straightens human existence itself. Some believes that neither the birth of philosophical problems nor the recognition of a problem is open to dialogue, because it is an individual matter, and the dominance of relativity leaves no common points among people. In this case, the importance of dialogue and even criticism come into question. However, this postmodern interpretation probably does not align much with the history of philosophy and its realities. The fact that philosophers consider dialogue useful for themselves and highly effective is enough for us to turn a dialogue and use it in the process of becoming problem-oriented and then problem recognition. Of course, there is another historical reality. Most philosophers, both in identifying and analyzing problems and in seeking answers, share a common concern, which is establishing free thought and preserving human freedom and will. However, expectation from philosophy must be clarified. The question is, What kind of problems should philosophy pay attention to? More clearly, what problems are philosophical problems? The philosophical problems must at least have these four characteristics. One being foundational, two, universality and global scopes, three, connection to the existence and truth of human being, four, existential and practical importance. Therefore, it must be acknowledged that the philosophical problem is neither a religious problem, nor a scientific problem, nor an economic problem, nor a political or social problem in the sense of detailed and everyday issue. I would like, for example, to talk here about the difference between a scientific problem and a philosophical one. Science cannot and should not replace philosophy because science, by its nature, deals with details and functional laws of material things, not their essence, and therefore cannot both raise philosophical questions and answer them. In fact, the decline of philosophy is not only impossible, it is dangerous. This is because humanities and social sciences, when facing the challenges of the world future, cannot use science and technology without the guidance of philosophy and reflection on meaning and being. Philosophy plays a role that cannot be replaced. Ontology, the philosophy of being, reveals things and objects for what they truly are. It shows us the relationship between things and objects. Through this work, philosophy naturally places before us a set of must does and must nots. Humanities and social societies and social sciences without this philosophical understanding would become nothing more than empty tools. They would not be able to answer the deep question about what we should do, not just what we can do. Science tells us what is possible and what works. Philosophy of being reveals what things are and how they relate to each other. From this understanding naturally comes a set of principles of human action. Without these, human and social sciences cannot face the challenges ahead. But problem-oriented, meaning the ability to give birth to a problem from the intersection of the mind with objective realities, is only one side of the coin, of course. The other side is problem recognition. For philosophers, partly recognizing the problem is discovering half of the solution. As Paston Bachelor said, no scientific truth is formed without posing a problem. Or as Paul Feyerabend said, intellectual progress is the result of engagement with problem, not following methods. Problem understanding in philosophy requires an integrated approach. Philosophy must use all available tools of rational thinking, whether formal logic, mathematical methods, historical analysis, or experimental methods, to explore the deep and fundamental roots of problems. However, One of the main weaknesses in traditional and even modern problem understanding methodology is the undervaluation of history. Both traditional and contemporary philosophers tend to underestimate the importance of history and historical linguistics. Not that they deny it exists, but they simply do not give it sufficient weight. Many contemporary philosophers discover problems as if they were born yesterday, without paying attention to the history of how the problem has changed, to its past origins, and to how the problem has transformed from one historical form to another. These historical oversights are precisely where fundamental errors occur. We may end up not truly understanding the problem, but only recognizing one of its temporary appearances in the present moment. From this perspective, perhaps continental philosophers have been more successful. Well, after this long introduction, let me now focus on the neo-philosophical issues that will arise in the future of technology, especially artificial technology, which I believe will play a central role in the technological world. The spread of artificial intelligence is seriously weakening people's ability to think deeply. This is a real danger that can challenge what it truly means to be human. For many philosophers today, this has become a critical issue because it threatens our ability to reflect, think critically, and be creative. In the last few centuries, industrialization already started to reduce human individuality and the feeling of being in control of one's own life. Now, with artificial intelligence, this danger can become much greater. In the AI era, people may be pushed aside not only as workers, but even as the main decision makers and active agents of their own lives. Work has always been one of the most basic parts of human life. With the arrival of advanced AI and robots, work now faces an unprecedented threat. Machines will replace humans in a huge number of jobs. This is not just an economic problem, it is an existential and philosophical crisis. Work is much more than just earning money. It is part of our identity, a source of meaning, and the reason many people feel valuable. Widespread unemployment caused by automation would take away one of the most important things that makes life feel meaningful. The big question becomes, one, if humans no longer work, how should we live? What will give life meaning in a world without work? How can we keep human dignity when we no longer have agency through work? On the other side, culture and cultural diversity were already in danger because creative culture was increasingly turned into just another commercial product, commercial product. Now with AI algorithms taking over the creation of music, art, film, and books, this danger is even greater than ever. Cultural homogenization driven by AI can dramatically reduce the richness and variety of human culture. Meanwhile, in the future, people may gradually lose their ability to think logically in depth and to see the big philosophical picture. If we rely too much on AI to process information and make decisions for us, our own deep cognitive skills and capacity for philosophical reasoning will become weaker. What about the danger of AI training? In the future, humanity could fall under the control of artificial intelligence and lose its freedom and free will. This control could appear in the form of monitoring, monitoring and shaping behavior, limiting real choices and taking away personal autonomy. Such a situation would seriously threaten the ethical and political foundation of democratic societies. Beside all I said about AI, there are other developments that will fundamentally change. One, genetic engineering and the fate of humanity. Changing human genes can completely transform what a human being is, social justice, and the meaning of natural life, and so the creation of evil beings. Two, directly connecting to the human brain to microchips and quantum computers. When the mind is linked directly to machines, the border between human and machine disappears. This raises deep questions about identity, consciousness, and what it means to be human. For instance, does this mean humanity will overcome death? 3. Turning humans into half robots, beings. The possibility of becoming part biological and part artificial creatures bring enormous ethical, existential, and social challenges. As a conclusion, as a result, in this talk, I explained the difference between problem orientation and problem analysis, and showed why both are necessary for serious philosophical work. My central point was the urgent need to revive the role of philosophy in the global community, a role that has been greatly weakened in recent decades. Philosophers must rediscover the transformative power of philosophy, and people everywhere must realize that without philosophical guidance, the core of human existence is at risk. I also highlighted artificial intelligence as the main challenge we face today and in the near future. Although I briefly mentioned genetic engineering and microchips, my focus was on the importance of AI and the future of human existence. I do not deny the positive aspects of new technologies. But the key task of philosophy is to understand how we can protect the essence of being human in an age shaped by AI. All these points lead to one conclusion. We are facing profound philosophical questions that must be addressed with seriousness and clarity. The future of humanity and even the meaning of being human depends on the answers we give today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank Dr. Gholami for his speech and wish all the best for him. I now ask Professor Thomas Boyer from the University of Vienna to start his speech titled Media Philosophy and Cultural Studies.
Hearing me? Are you hearing me? Are you seeing me?
Yes,
Great.
Professor.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, I thank you very much for the invitation. I like to have the possibility to talk about the future studies in the framework of media change, because I get out from the start point that if you talk about the reality, we talk about how we are constructing it. It's important how we are constructing it. That means it is a cultural way to construct a reality as we understand the present or the past, or as we understand the future. So if we are talking about the media change, we are talking about the way how the society is understanding to each other, in the way as they are communicating. So the question is as well that if we talk, or let me like that, if we talk about communication, we know we are not talking about any object that is in front of us. We are talking about a way how we interpret what we think communication, the way as we get understood to each other is. So communication, society, even media is always, let me say, a metaphor of description. We describe what we observe, we describe what we think. So that means that in a constructive way, that the world is as we think. So that's why it's important to talk about and to think about how are we thinking communication, how are we thinking media, in order to understand ourselves, what we expect from the environment we are living with. And one of the categories of the environment we are living with is, of course, what we call the future. And the future as well is a description, is a metaphor of the description how we understand time in categories of past and present and future. So when we talk about the media change, we have to talk about the characters of this change. And there's a discussion about the digitalization and digitalization, which is very omnipresent. They are driven by science, by politics, by industry and civil society as well. They cover all areas of life, focus on various technological innovations in the internet environment, promise solutions, address risks, and are accordingly ramified and controversial. This article I'm trying to talk about looks behind the sober technological facade of digitalization from a media change perspective that understands change as an innovation-driven, co-evolutionary process under complex conditions. Such a perspective focuses on the evolution of hybrid socio-cultural constellations, understands innovation as a co-evolutionary process, and sees the communalities between biological and technological evolution in complexity theories and selection paradigms. So technology is interpreted as an institution and consequently as a governance mechanism, as an intermediary, and as an actor in the context of a distributed agency between humans and technology. So I'm related very much to a scientist, Austrian scientist living in Switzerland, Michael Latzer, who has really done a lot of things to understand what media change means and why media change is something that mirrors the change of the society, as well the challenges and the chances. As digitalization is not a new phenomenon, it will first be placed in the context of 20th century digitalization debate in order to highlight continuities and changes. This is followed by a presentation of its main characteristics summarized as a co-evolutionary digital trinity, as Latzer says: datafication, algorithmization, and platformization. This is something which is already a picture of belief of the human evolution reflected in transhumanism and the pursuit of a nanobio convergence, and the convergence of digital technology and, let's say, religion toward an implicit everyday religion. We believe in the power of change. We believe in the power of future. These features are reflected in the specifics of an emergent digital social order of society and summarized in the final section. Two phases of digitalization. On the one hand, digitalization and its public discussion can be divided in two phases. The first is the second half of the 20th century, and the second is in the early 21st century. Still very relevant. It's good to focus on the second phase, but starts by pointing out some formative similarities and differences. What has changed are the central socio-technical innovations, the character of change, and thus the expected consequences. From a technological perspective, the first phase is characterized by the spread of digital computer technology, by the eponymous transition from analog to digital technology in telecommunications and broadcasting, and by the beginning of mass internet penetration following the launch of the World Wide Web. So we know what we are talking about, and I know I'm talking about things you already need, but it is important to remind of them in order to understand our understanding of a future on a technological level. But if we are talking about the technological level, we know we are talking about the social meaning, the political meaning, the historical meaning, as well as the philosophical meaning. Altogether, this fundamentally changes the economic conditions. These are accompanied by corporate convergence in traditionally separate subsectors, with firms now offering bundles of services across subsectors, broadcasting, telephony, and internet, and so on. The co-evolutionary innovation cycle is also spilling over the political level. Politics take account of the changed economic conditions in digitized and convergent markets by pushing and coordinating liberalization of telecommunication and communication in frames of technology. In a sense, the 20th century digitization debate primarily relates to the change of an analog to digital technology in all those phenomena like telephony and broadcasting and so on. It remains largely limited to communication policy and on the provider side primarily concerns the traditional players of the information and communication technology sector. The politico-economic effects discussed in the context of digitization concentrate on the liberalization and partially privatization of formerly nationally closed monopolistic communication in markets. So we are facing the classical media somehow as a professionalized and institutionalized way of communication. Now, when we think about new media and social media, the social communication is very much individualized. So all these processes and the interpretations behind it, what it means as we are communicating by technology, means we are delegating responsibility, the question of truth and the question of trust. We are delegating it to mechanisms of technology, but not only technology, as we know, in the same way to economy and the interests of the economy. And I think this is the real problem, and what we think about when we think about what we should think about, because if you think about future and what do we understand as a future to become, it's not something that comes and we have to deal with it. It's what we think it will be, it should be, it could be. Because as the world is, as we think it, we construct the world as we are communicating it. And that's why we have to observe our communication and the way as communication, the mediality of communication is changing, in order then to know what it means to talk about the future. We can see that somehow in the way as we are communicating. In summary, going back to that, the second phase of this digitalization differs very much from the first. It is no longer limited to the communication sector, but now permeates all areas of life. Structurally similar to the first phase, a co-evolutionary spiral movement based on two convergences is also characteristic of the early 21st century digital transformation, as we have been talking about. So it seems we should be aware of the cultural and social meaning of three processes going on, shaping a media society. And I'm again relating to Michael Latz's idea of this somehow religious-like trinity, as he called this. What means media society compared to family or milieu or society changing to a milieu or a family society changing to a technically supported next society. We are not anymore a family society where we try to organize trust, belongingness to each other, responsibility for each other. So as Charles Taylor said, we are living more and more in a next to next society, which is much more arbitrary, which puts questions like responsibility and trust into the question of how we are communicating to each other individually, not institutionally, but individually, not even organized, because in the social media, anyone can anytime communicate or comment to any topic, whatever, and we do not have any idea about the competence or about the backgrounds of these people. So we are really facing a new. We are facing the challenge to understand the mechanisms of trust, maybe in another way, in another characterization, as we are used to that. So from a media change perspective, the digitalization proclaimed by all sides in science, politics, and business in this early first century, as we are living with, datafication, algorithmization, and platformization, as I already talked about. So what does it mean? I think we should talk about a little bit those categories. Datafication creates big data. It's a new asset class and thus reproduces areas of life, while algorithmization automates selection processes and assigns relevance to these data in order to extract economic, social, and political capital from it. And the platformization restructures markets and business models, also increasingly commercializing the social sphere and thus creating optimized organizational forms for further reaching social datafication and algorithmization. So the cycle of this threefold digital transformation is spiraling deeper and deeper through modern societies, following a genuine logic and displaying several peculiarities. So what I like to bring into our discussion is that the media scenery is changing not only its structures, it's changing its meaning. So the change we have to face in order to understand to what future we might come in by that is really to understand not the media as a system, as a structural object out of ourselves, which we can observe. No, it's the quality perspective, and this means not the media, but the mediality. Talking like that, we can go further and we say society is not only using media in order to communicate to each other. No, it's more. The society has a quality of media, or we can say the mediality of society, as we also say, or can say for talk about the mediality of communication. So if we say the mediality of communication and understand communication as the matter of life, so then we can talk about the mediality of identity, the mediality of religion, the mediality of the state, of the politics, the mediality of life. So understanding this means we are on a new level of understanding ourselves, and in the way that we only are able to understand ourselves on the level of identity. For example, we only can understand ourselves if we have someone as an opposite. I only can talk about myself if I have an opposite in order to say this is you and this is me. And this is on the level of individuals, the same as in the level of culture. This is you and this is me. This is your culture and this is my culture. And both, or even all of them, they are interpretations of our existence. So that means the existence is a construction by communication. We construct not just the reality, but the authority of a society, the authority of an individual, what we call the identity. I think this is the challenge we are faced with. So the future will be, or as far as we can talk about the future or study the future, means to understand the situation not only in its structures, but our life situation on the level of its meaning. And the meaning is not something that is given by the structures. The meaning is as we understand, as we use. For example, media then is not just a system that can be used in order to communicate. No, media is more. Media is, in a cultural theoretical understanding, media is as we use the media. This is media, not only the structure, because media is not a tool for communication. Media is the language of communication, as media is the language of society, is the language of economy, is the language of whatever we mean. We have a language by which we can present ourselves, interpret ourselves, present to others, observe others. That means any observation is done by any interest, and the interest is to understand myself in the way to look at the other. That means if I am observing any other, an individual or any other culture or any other religion or any other political system, I'm doing it in the interest to understand myself better than I do, to understand my politics better, to understand my culture better, and so on. So the object of observation, if I'm observing other cultures, is my own culture. I'm observing my own culture in relation to another one. So I think this is very important, because then we can understand what it means, or how important any other one is, in order to know more about myself for yesterday, for today, and for tomorrow. In what way I, as a society, or as an individual, or as a culture, or as a religion, or whatever, will develop. What is the character of change? And the character of change is, as we observe it, in mirroring our thinking in technology, in politics, in culture. In that way, we have to be, for the future, we have to be aware. Let me say it like that. Thanks God, we have many cultures. Thanks God, we have many languages. Thanks God, we have many religions, because all those, let me say, systems, they are just interpretations what we observe could mean. So the reality is not just as it is, the reality is as we observe it. This is the reality. So if we are talking on that level, then the future we are talking about is the question: what is our competence, what is our interest to observe? Because any observation in social sciences level is not an observation of the objects, is an observation as we think about the objects. We observe as we think about society. We observe as we think about religion. We observe as we think about family or identity or whatever. So it's always an observation on a second level, because as a social scientist, I cannot observe the society. I observe as I am observing the society, or as I'm observing as we all in a global are observing what we think society is. So that means if we want to know what future is, we must know what are we thinking, how are we thinking, and this is a cultural studies approach to understand to understand the meaning of future. So I think this is or what I wanted to make clear is also by describing the technological approach or the technological development. Sorry, the technological development. It is important that we bring these future studies far than just to observe the structures and the functions of a structural system in order to say what could we change in order to make life better or make life easier. Well, this is one way that we could say future is there where we try to delegate all the complexities of our life to the technology, for example, as we often used to delegate the complexities of our lives to religion, to politics, to economy, to technology. So this is one interpretation of what is media, and as we use the media as a way to delegate the complexity. And then we say the media is complex, the politics is complex, the religion is complex. No, complexity always is a character of thinking. As we contextualize things, they make us problem because we have a moral understanding, we have an aesthetical or an ethical understanding, an aesthetical understanding, and an understanding of usability. So those three, how shall I say, characters, they are connected to each other, and the one needs the other as the other conditions the one. So if I want to define the sense of a future, the meaning of future, then my question is, what is the usability? What is its aesthetic, means is its frame of order, and what is its ethic? So when we would like to understand what the future is and how we could prepare for this future in order to be competent in cultivating the future, in cultivating the society, in cultivating whatever we think would be possible as an institution for the future, maybe media, maybe family, maybe politics, whatever. So then we must really think about what do we think is the sense of religion, what is the sense of culture, what is the sense of media. And I would say, referring to a philosophical knowledge I got in early times, there are those three categories: usability, aesthetics, and ethics. These three categories define what makes sense, and nothing is usable if it is not ethical and not aesthetical. Nothing is ethical if it is not usable and not aesthetic, and nothing is aesthetic if it is not ethical and usable. So that means usability of a media connected to its ethical and aesthetical category. This could be a way how to think about future as something by which we want to make maybe more sense as we have done until now. Thank you very much. what's going on.
Thank you very much, Professor. I want to truly thank Professor Thomas Boyer for his speech and wish all the best for him. I now ask Professor Robert Hanna from Canada to start his speech titled The Myth of AI, the Future of the Human Intelligence and the Role of the Philosophy. Thank you very much.
Good morning.
Hello, Professor.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good morning from Vancouver Island, Canada. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this conference and to present this talk. No digital computing systems or digital technology, no matter how sophisticated or tricked out with high-tech bells and whistles, will ever be able to equal or exceed the essentially embodied innate mental capacities or powers of rational human animals. Not even in principle can such systems or technology match or surpass our capacities or powers. To be sure, digital computing systems or digital technology can carry out certain operations much faster and more accurately than we can. But that's not a fact about the nature, scope, and limits of our mental capacities or powers, but rather only a fact about the applications of these powers to certain mechanical tasks, and no more philosophically exciting or significant than the quotidian fact that we can build machines that can move faster than we do, lift heavier weights than we do, or make more accurate measurements than we do. In other words, digital computing systems and digital technology are artificial, but not intelligent, in the sense in which we're intelligent. And to that extent, the term artificial intelligence is simply an oxymoron or two-word paradox. The widely held yet profoundly false contrary belief, namely that digital computing systems or digital technology can equal or exceed the essentially embodied innate mental capacities or powers of rational human animals, is what I call the myth of artificial intelligence, or the myth of AI for short. Tautologically, the myth of AI is a myth with no causal powers of its own. Nevertheless, just as nuclear war technology and biological weapons technology aren't either intelligent or super intelligent, yet still pose an all too real dire threat to humankind in the brute raw sense that their use can kill everyone and destroy the earth as we know it, so too the myth of AI poses an all too real dire threat to humankind's embodied or physical existence, especially insofar as people believe that nuclear weapons technology and biological weapons technology should be controlled by so-called intelligent or so-called super intelligent digital computers that run or will run drones, killer robots, missiles, and other deadly machines. Their worry is that these super intelligent digital computers could on their own become morally satanic, run amok, and destroy humankind, which would then survive only by uploading the sets of algorithms that constitute their so-called minds into shiny new digital technology. This accelerationist and transhumanist apocalyptic mindset is especially characteristic of very, very rich technocrats and their scientific lackeys. But leaving aside accelerationist and transhumanist fantasies, the authentic bottom line worry is just that high-powered digital technology will be misused by the people who create and control this technology, your Googles and your OpenAIs, against the interests of the rest of humankind. Moreover, and more importantly, I think, the myth of AI proposes a different yet equally dire threat to humankind's cognitive, affective, and practical existence. In short, to humankind's conscious and self-conscious existence, even if humankind continues to exist in the embodied or physical sense. Digital computing systems or digital technology that can supposedly equal or exceed rational human-animal intelligence are sometimes called artificial general intelligence, or AGI. Nevertheless, AGI is no more really possible than is Sonny the NS5 prototype robot in the 2004 movie I, Robot. Science fiction and futuristic fantasy are just fine as artistic genres, provided that we don't also start to believe them and act on that belief. But the myth of AI is pernicious, since it leads us not only to seriously to depreciate and underestimate our own mental capacities, but also by means of our excessive use and reliance on digital technology, seriously to neglect or even impair our own mental capacities or powers. This is particularly true in the case of the recent rollout of large language models, LLMs, or chatbots like ChatGPT. This is what I call the invasion of the mind snatchers. And to the extent that we knowingly or unknowingly disseminate and perpetuate the myth of AI, we also seriously misapply and misuse our own mental capacities or powers. That all being so, in view of the two existential threats posed to humanity by the myth of AI, then the only remaining really important philosophical questions are, first, why does the myth of AI persist? And secondly, what can philosophy do about it? As to the first question, I think that the persistence of the myth of AI can be explained by a combination of 6 essentially ideological causal factors. First, a dogmatic or at least irresponsibly uncritical commitment to the false doctrine of Cartesian dualism, whether substance dualism or property dualism. Secondly, a dogmatic or at least irresponsibly uncritical commitment to the fantasy of post-humanist or transhumanist spiritualism. Third, a dogmatic or at least irresponsibly uncritical commitment to the false doctrine of intellectualism about the nature of rational human animals and rational human cognition. Fourth, a dogmatic or at least irresponsibly uncritical commitment to false, that is to say reductive, whether reductive or non-reductive, materialist or physicalist views about the rational human mind, especially including computational functionalism. Fifth, more generally, a dogmatic or at least irresponsibly uncritical commitment to the false, what I call mechanistic worldview. And finally, sixth, the hegemony of what I call the military-industrial digital complex, which amasses and reaps immense wealth and political power precisely by means of effectively and relentlessly disseminating and perpetuating the myth of AI, while at the same time hypocritically issuing public warnings about the dangers of runaway AI. The first 5 factors are classically philosophical factors, so they're at least in principle open to critical rational argumentation, refutation, and correction. But the same is not the case with respect to the 6th factor, which is essentially social, institutional, and political in nature. Sadly, however, I think that it's more than merely reasonable to hold that the hegemony of the military-industrial digital complex is the principal cause of the persistence of the myth of AI, as Garrison Lovely cogently and crisply puts it. Now I'm quoting, "The debate playing out in the public square may lead you to believe that we have to choose between addressing AI's immediate harms and its inherently speculative existential risks. And there are certainly trade-offs that require careful consideration. But when you look at the material forces at play, a different picture emerges. In one corner are trillion-dollar companies trying to make AI models more powerful and profitable. In another corner, you find civil society groups trying to make AI reflect values that routinely clash with profit maximization. In short, it's capitalism versus humanity." That's lovely. Nevertheless, radical social, institutional, and political change for the better, or even the best, is really possible by means of what Michel Macy and I have called the mind-body politic, and its enactive transformative principle in a book we published in 2019 called The Mind-Body Politic. So to end this section on an upbeat note, there's at least some rational hope for debunking the myth of AI by devolving and enactively transforming the military-industrial digital complex. Now, to address the second question I raised earlier, what is to be done by philosophy? What I'm proposing is a view I call dignitarian neo-Luddism with respect to digital technology. Dignitarian neo-Luddism with respect to digital technology says that not all digital technology is bad and wrong, but instead all and only the digital technology that harms and oppresses ordinary people, i.e. people other than digital technocrats, by either failing to respect our human dignity sufficiently or by outright violating our human dignity, is bad and wrong. And therefore, all and only this bad and wrong digital technology should be rejected, but not, except in extreme cases of digital technology whose coercive use is actually violently harming and oppressing ordinary people. For example, digitally driven weapons or weapon systems being used for mass destruction or mass murder, destroyed, but rather only simply refused, non-violently dismantled, or radically transformed into its opposite, its moral opposite. What I strongly believe is that we all ought to be dignitarian neo-Luddites with respect to digital technology. Why? To be sure, there are many ways in which digital technology can be bad and wrong in the dignitarian sense, including invasive digital surveillance, digitally driven weapons and weapon systems, algorithmic bias, and digital manipulation and nudging. And of course, there are also ways in which digital technology can be bad and wrong in the utilitarian sense, for example, putting many people out of work. But the principal reason for being a dignitarian neo-Luddite with respect to digital technology is that our excessive use of, and indeed addiction to digital technology, is systematically undermining our innate capacities for thinking, caring, and acting for ourselves. This is preeminently true with respect to the new chatbots, for example, ChatGPT and others, and what I've called the myth of AI more generally, but also to an increasingly important degree true of our excessive use of addiction to smartphones, desktop and laptop computers, the internet, social media, and so on and so forth, including, of course, Google Meet and Zoom. When you combine our excessive use of and addiction to chatbots and AI with our excessive use of and addiction to smartphones, desktop and laptop computers, the internet, social media, and so on, the result is nothing less than an all-out existential attack on our rational human-mindedness or intelligence. So if I'm correct, then the members of the military-industrial digital complex are systematically harming and oppressing ordinary people like us by not only enabling, but also effectively mandating our excessive use of and addiction to digital technology, which in turn systematically undermines our innate capacities for thinking, caring, and acting for ourselves, and thereby systematically undermine our human real personhood and thereby violate our human dignity. Therefore, we ought to ban all giant AI experiments and LLM chatbot technology while they are still in their infancy, just as we ought to have banned all atomic bomb experiments and nuclear weapons technology while they were still in their infancy. Perhaps dignitarian neo-Luddism with respect to digital technology will become a worldwide, world-changing social and political movement comparable to the ban the bomb, anti-nuclear weapons movement. I wholeheartedly hope so. If we ban all further giant AI experiments and LLM chatbot technology right now, when it's already obvious what their existential threat to humankind is, then the world will be a substantially better place. Just as the world would have been a substantially better place if we had banned the A-bomb and nuclear weapons technology immediately after its initial test on 16th of July, 1945, when it was already obvious what their existential threat to humanity would be. Therefore, humankind's role in the future, therefore, philosophy's role in the future can be to lead the way forward for humankind by vigorously defending and publicizing dignitarian neo-Luddism with respect to digital technology. Thank you.
Professor Robert Hanna, thank you. I want to truly thank Professor Robert Hanna for his speech and wish all the best for him. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I now ask Professor Maurice Hamilton from University of Portland, USA, to start his speech. Professor Maurice Hamilton, here
All right, I'm trying to share my screen.
Hello, Professor Hamilton.
Hello, I'm trying to share a screen here, and I can't
Yes,
find.
you can share your PowerPoint.
Yeah. Let's see. I am. I'm sorry, just a little technical difficulty here. It's on the wrong. Okay, let's see if this works. I can't seem to get the right screen to share. I have multiple screens. Let's see. Sorry. Oh, it wants it on the same tab.
Can you see your PowerPoint, Professor Hamilton?
Let's see.
I shared your PowerPoint.
Yeah,
Can you see?
I do see it. Let's see. Don't know how to get this to see the correct screen. Share. Ugh. Yeah.
Hello, Professor. If I may, I'm sorry. If I may just give a tip on how to share your screen.
Sure.
In the bottom corner, there's this icon with a rectangle, an arrow up. I'm sorry, yes, there's a bit of a sound problem. And after choosing that, you can see a list of all the tabs and applications that you can choose from. If you have your slides in PowerPoint, you can choose the PowerPoint app, and I believe that can help with it. If there's anything else I can assist you with.
Unfortunately, it is not giving me PowerPoint as an option. Let's see.
There are three categories when you try to share your screen. One is from tabs, the other one is from programs, and another one is from areas. I believe you have to choose the middle one, if that helps. Let me try it on my own as well. Yes, you have three categories. There's an entire screen sharing of Windows, and sharing Microsoft Edge tabs or Chrome tabs or whatever you have.
Yes, I see that. Unfortunately, it is not giving me the option of my PowerPoint as one of the options. I'm sorry about this.
Not at all. I believe Dr. Askari has your PowerPoints. Do you want him to share and continue while you speak? Is that okay?
Yes, that's okay. I updated the PowerPoints a little bit, so I guess I will just go ahead and start and apologize to all the viewers there that I can't. That you can't see my screen. It's very unfortunate because I have it right here. But okay, so thank you very much for this opportunity to address this group. I've been very impressed with all of the presentations, and I've taken much notes. My name is Maurice Hamilton. I'm at Portland State University in Portland, Oregon. The title of my talk is Centering Care in the Modern Social Compact. I want to thank Professor Mohammed Askari for his all the work and everybody else, all the work to put something like this together. A conference like this is no easy task. So I'm going to take the conversation in a little bit different direction. I don't know if you're. I'm going to the second screen. I don't know if you're showing the PowerPoint. I can't see it, so. Perhaps you're not. In this presentation, I am going to talk about the future of philosophy from a different perspective, from feminist philosophy, feminist care ethics specifically. And in this presentation, I want to talk a little bit about a major threat that is occurring in this country. Yes, that's the slide. In the world in terms of democratic backsliding. I'm going to present a little bit because I'm going to assume that most people have not been exposed to feminist care ethics. So I'm going to talk a little bit about care ethics, and care theory, and address care political theory. And then the central theme, I'm going to look at what it means to center care in the modern social compact. I'm going to speak a little bit about a terrestrial care agreement as part of a modern social care compact, and then end the talk with a little bit of discussing the task of hope. Okay, next slide, please. There's an organization called the Varieties of Democracy Institute, and it every year produces a report tracking democracies in the world, and it is very much featured this concept of democratic backsliding. Since the Cold War, democratic backsliding has been pervasive. Now the world has fewer democracies than autocracies for the first time in over 20 years. Liberal democracies have become the least common regime type for the world, with a total of 29 in 2024. Nearly 3 out of 4 people in the world, 72%, now live on autocracies. This is the highest number in since 1978. Of course, coming from the United States, I'm very concerned about this because we've gone from a democracy to a near autocracy in a very short period of time. Next slide. So why am I so concerned about the idea of autocracy? Because it relates to care. With autocracy, you get a reduction of social well-being. Individual freedoms are suppressed. We can all observe this, but also many studies have been done to this effect. Journalism is undermined. Infrastructure is disinvested in. Economies decline. This is despite the promises of autocrat, of better times. Studies have shown that autocracies lead to a decline in the economy, particularly when it comes to the equality of distribution. In this sense, the crisis of care is exacerbated. We often speak of this moment as a crisis of care, and it certainly is, and becoming more so because of this democratic backsliding. Next slide. So a vision of a caring democracy is needed, something to give us hope in these bleak times, a vision of something better. And a caring democracy, one where care is at the center of our government and our government's agreements with us, is something that can have broad appeal, and a reformulation of how we think about the social compact. All right, next slide. So I want to introduce the whole idea of care ethics, care theory, and the care thinking that's going on. So the next few slides are going to address that. We're going to talk about care, the basic human need that sustains us and allows us to flourish. Care ethics, a relational approach to morality that values content, emotion, and imagination. Care theory, an umbrella term that is comprehensive of ethics, aesthetics, epistemology, and ontology when it's related to care. And we're not going to talk as much about embodied care. This is something you see in the right-hand corner there, a book I wrote about 25 years ago on embodied care, and how the body is the central place where we learn about care, and how we understand care. And even when we think complexly about care, in terms of infrastructure or something like that, we draw upon metaphors of the body, what we know in our body. Just a couple of months ago, I became a grandfather for the first time, and my daughter, watching my granddaughter, I can see how she understands care in her body, even though she doesn't have words yet for it. And we often in philosophy forget the fact that we are embodied beings. Okay, next slide. Care is it is so essential to humanity. It is often unnoticed, much like oxygen. We don't think about breathing, we don't think about oxygen, but we need it to survive. And the same is true about care. It's difficult to overestimate how essential care is to humanity. We like to tell a story about the history of humanity as competition, survival of the fittest, and we are kind of top of the food chain because of our ability to compete and so forth. But another story can be told about the history of humanity, and that is how care, compassion, cooperation has got us to where we are today. Care not only sustains us, but allows us to flourish. It always has, and it always will. Care is not just vital when we are born or when we are ill or under threat or when we're dying. We need care all the time, even when we are at our best. We need to have those caring relations in our lives. Next slide, please. Joan Toronto, a political philosopher, is one of the leading political philosophers in the world today. And she has this definition that is most often quoted when it comes to caring. She says, on the most general level, we suggest that caring be viewed as a species activity that includes everything that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. That world includes our bodies, ourselves, and our environment, all of which we seek to interweave in a complex, life-sustaining web. Care theorists often talk about relationality, webs, interconnection. It's a constant theme. Next slide, please. Care ethics is the term care ethics itself, which is the term that is kind of the state of the art in the field, is a relational approach to morality. It places relationship at the center of ethical thinking. It is a very contextual approach to morality, and it is open to emotion. This is not a cold, emotionless kind of approach to ethics. Emotion is can be part of our strength. It can be part of our rationality. Care ethics has normative implications like other ethical theories, but it does different work than other ethical approaches. It's not solely concerned with adjudicating moral dilemmas, right or wrong. It is more concerned about how we lead our lives and relate to one another. It has longer temporal time frames. It is, in that sense, very similar to virtue theories, but it is less individualistic than virtue theories. Care is very much a relational morality, and it assumes a human relational ontology. We are fundamentally relational beings. Next slide, please. So in care ethics development, was first named in the 1980s by scholars in many disciplines. People like Nell Noddings, pictured on the left there, who was a philosopher and an education theorist, and Carol Gilligan, a developmental psychologist, named it in the 1980s. And it was first very much kind of an interpersonal morality, and they did the important job of naming the previously unnamed. And then it grew into a political and social philosophy, but with the work of Joan Toronto and others. But that's, these are the Western terms of this. Of course, understandings of care are worldwide, and there are indigenous cultures that have great traditions and thought a great deal about what care is. And even within the Western tradition, folks have gone back and looked at genealogies of care, tied it back to people like David Hume and even John Dewey and Jane Addams and other figures. Next slide, please. So today, care ethics and care theory is enjoying a kind of golden age. It used to be a very niche field with just a few scholars in it. But now it is a worldwide phenomenon. In this year alone, I've been fortunate enough to make 6 international trips to do presentations on care ethics, and in every continent there are folks working on care ethics, and it's exciting to see the international development of it. And it goes across disciplines, not just philosophy, but psychology, education, law, journalism, geography, you name it. People are working on care, and now there are international conferences, there are podcasts, there are journals dedicated to care, and it's an exciting time to be in this field. Next slide. Although care ethics is the moniker that is most associated with the field, many theorists, including myself, prefer the term care theory to go beyond the limitations that ethics has in the Western tradition of being about determining issues of right and wrong. Kant set us on that path. Care theory is an umbrella term for epistemology, ontology, aesthetics, and all of these have been written about extensively. Just recently, Routledge started a care aesthetics book series. I mean, that's how this concept is spreading. Next slide, please. The characteristics of care theory. I say it's non-binary. It's more concerned with continuums rather than binaries of right and wrong or care, not care. It thinks in the complexity and nuance of the human experience, and it doesn't always fall into those kinds of dichotomies. It is not extreme altruism. Sometimes people hear the word care and they think that you have to be pure in some sense, but care also addresses the issue of self-care. You have to care for the self and others, and so you can be self-interested in care. It is not altruistic in the extreme. It is also non-perfectionist. It doesn't have a perfection standard. It is a non-ideal theory in that sense, even though it has an ideal at the center of it, because it is no one can be a perfect carer. All you can do is try to be better at it if you think it's the heart of morality. It's also a process morality. Because you're in relationship, we have to think in longer temporal terms. It's not just making a decision at a given point. You're in a relationship, and so there's that striving for improving that caring, that responsiveness in a relationship. So it has this process element to it. And it's both humanist and non-humanist, even though it began as a very interpersonal kind of approach. It has been extended and applied to environmental concerns, technological concerns. It is, so there are animal concerns too. And so it has humanist and non-humanist elements to it. Next slide, please. In my latest book that came out last year, Revolutionary Care, I try to address the issue of what good care is. And the reason for that is the word care is, in a sense, a neutral term. Care that has been invoked by many people for nefarious purposes. I mean, colonial powers use the term care for their subjects. Abusers use the word care. And so how do we distinguish care, good care, from other kinds of care? The problem, of course, is that care is very contextual. It matters the cultural context, the location, just the situational context matters. And so what I offer is these three kind of skills for care or betterment of care. The first is humble inquiry, acquiring knowledge of the one cared for, knowing about them without preconception. I think humility is a very important part of care, to really listen to somebody else. Inclusive connection. This is where engaging your empathy, your moral imagination for the other. Of course, empathy needs to be attuned by knowledge, but making this connection to other, an inclusive connection, because it's easy to care for those who you are familiar with. The real moral part of this is extending it to care for others who we are less familiar with. And the third element is responsive action. Care is always an action. It's not just a disposition. A disposition matters, but it's not just a disposition. It has to be actuated in the world by action. And not just any action, but action that is the responsive to the need and the context of the other. So these taken together are the skills, I think, of good care. And I've written articles about care being a kind of improvisation. You bring these skills into a situation and determine what to do. Next slide, please. And so because you bring the skills into it, there's a kind of emergent normativity to care. Those two words seem odd to put together for philosophers, but rather than just knowing what to do, knowing that you bring into any situation that you want to care, you have to kind of dance the dance. You have to respond to the person, their needs, the people involved, and so the the caring thing to do, the good thing to do, emerges from the situation rather than is imposed, upon it in advance. Okay, next slide, please. So care political theory attempts to put relationships and care at the center of public policy and practices. So, rather than using abstract universal principles for everything, what would be caring in this context? How do we take people into account? How do we listen to their needs? How do we respond accordingly to those needs? This is what care political theory does. And there have been wonderful books. There's a book out of the UK that came out a couple of years ago called The Care Manifesto, and talked about economies of care, what we need to do to change the economy. So political theory in care is probably one of the hottest fields that there's a lot of writing, and there are political theorists beyond Joan Toronto writing, again, worldwide on the subject. Next slide, please. Now, one of Joan Toronto's big contributions is to see the connection between democracy and caring. So I talked about the problem at the beginning of the speech on democratic backsliding, and for Toronto, care and democracy go hand in hand. You need democracy within care to make sure that you're not just being paternalistic, you're listening to others, you're being inclusive, but you also need care in democracy. In a sense, the recent experience in the United States is a case study in that, where we had all the rules and objectively safeguards in place, but there wasn't the relational aspect was underdeveloped, and the extreme lack of caring that took place overwhelmed the rules. And so care and democracy go hand in hand, according to Joan Toronto. Next slide, please. So I use the word compact as I'm thinking about this, rather than social contract, because I want to get away from these kind of capitalistic neoliberal terms of contract, and try to expand the notion of what it means for what we owe one another, and centering care in those social agreements, making that the primary objective, the categorical imperative of these. Next slide, please. So, Ronald Reagan was one of the architects of the modern neoliberal narrative agenda that seems to dominate the world. And early in his career, he says the most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help." And that has, set in motion a terrible trend, at least in the United States, but I think elsewhere too, where the government is seen with suspicion, not trusted, thought of as incompetent. And care, I think, envisions a government that does the opposite, a government that says, "I am here for you." Nell Noddings said that the fundamental attitude of caring is, "I am here for you." And we need a government that does that through its infrastructure and how it front faces toward people, that brings care to the center of that kind of thinking. Next slide, please. Another important care theorist, Virginia Held, actually very early on in one of the original works back in the 90s, addressed the idea of a social compact, and thought that the ethics of care should really kind of challenge the whole contractual kind of thinking, and go and do something beyond that. Next slide, please. And in that vein, and in the vein of some of the issues that we're talking about, a care compact has to be for people, of course, but more than for people. It needs, we need a terrestrial care compact. The terrestrial is a fairly recent concept, and applying care to kind of post-humanism, and because the well-being of the planet, democratic backsliding isn't just bad for people, it's bad for the planet. Environmental policies are usually scaled back and hurt under autocracies. So the care compact for the world must go beyond just people. Next slide, please. The terrestrial is a concept that comes from Bruno Latour, and it is not, I mean, Bruno Latour was not a care theorist, but if you look at his work, a lot of it is very relational and fits strongly with what care ethics is trying to address. And his concept of the terrestrial, I think, is important here. Next slide. Another theorist who was Kenneth Jurgensen, describes the terrestrial as a new story of humans as more than humans, so-called earthbounds, and necessitates building links in political thought between humans and the larger complexes of which humans are also part. The terrestrial is an adjective that doesn't specify whether agents are human or non-human. It's just that beings are involved. Next slide, please. So in this sense, what happens is that the terrestrials all are agential participants. Now, this is a hard thing to do. We often speak of giving rights to animals or giving rights to the environment, but to truly have a terrestrial compact, we have to figure out how to perceive the agency of these entities around us. And there are feminist physicists and others who are thinking in this regard, because you know, Gaia, the Earth, is not going to yield to our agreements. It's going to do what it's going to do, and we need to be listening and responding as best that we can to that. So the care compact really must be a kind of terrestrial compact. Next slide, please. So pursuing hope. I think, just as Professor Riaz Gholami said, it's the job of philosophers to provide hope. And we have an important role to play in this. History tells us that there have been many bleak times in the world, and you know, depressions, world wars, and so forth, where it seemed like we wouldn't survive, or we couldn't get through it, and we can. And oftentimes, what got us through it were ideas, the kinds of ideas that philosophers bring forth about a better humanity. Not just the philosophy we have must resist what's going on now, but we also have to provide a vision for something better, because we don't want to just go back to what we had before. We want a vision of something better, and I think care can help us do that. Centering care in our mutual commitments can help us think about an alternative future. Okay, next slide, please. There can be a kind of care populism. Everybody understands something about care, and we can use that because care is an essential good. Even people we politically disagree with or are problematic, they have care in their lives. But care is a pragmatist good because it can, you know, push back against this democratic backsliding and create a different kind of populism. A caring democracy is something that is not just Pollyannish. It is something that we can achieve. It's something like John Dewey talks in terms of pragmatism ends in view, something that is both beyond what we have now, but reachable. And he can, and I think CARE can do that. Now, on my slide deck, I had added a slide. I just wanted to mention, if you want to understand and read more about CARE, you can go to the open access Journal of Philosophical Investigations, and a recent special issue, volume 19, issue 51 from the summer of 2025, Caring and Time, has a series of 10 articles from scholars from Australia, Canada, France, India, South Korea, Spain, Tanzania, and the United States, contributing to it, thinking about using a play on words on Heidegger's being in time. It's called Caring in Time, thinking about the temporal dimensions of care in a variety of different contexts. And it was edited by myself and Sarah Munawar, a Muslim care ethicist from Canada. And of course, editor-in-chief is Muhammad Asghari, who's also leading us in this conference. So you're welcome to look for that. Can you go to the last slide, please? Also, I welcome you to come to my website and see other resources on CARE. And if you want to contact me and talk about CARE, I would welcome that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Maurice Hamilton. I hope to see you at other conferences in the future. I wish you good health and your family. Thank you. At the end of this philosophical meeting, I would like to express my excuse me. I would like to express my gratitude to all the speakers, Professor Slavoj Žižek, Professor Frank Roda, Professor Jeremy Chi Moore, Professor Donald Phillips, Dr. Reza Gholami, Professor Thomas Bayer, Professor Robert Hanna, and Professor Maurice Hamilton. And the participants who accompanied us during this conference. It was your presence and thoughts that defended the discussion and turned this event into a valuable opportunity for philosophical reflections on the future of the world. During this meeting, we once again realized that questions about the future are not the sole concern of specialists in a particular field. They are an invitation to interdisciplinary collaboration, global dialogue, and a shared responsibility to rethink the paths that humanity chose. The ideas and the challenges that were raised, from technological evolution to the ethics of biotechnology, from the human freedom to the global impact of climate change, are all reminders of the fact that the future is not a distant thing, but a reality that is taking shape every day. I hope that the topics of this conference can inspire new research, lasting collaborations, and new perspectives. I'm confident that the outcome of these discussions will deepen our understanding of the changing world and enrich our efforts to build a more responsible and human future. Once again, I thank you for your valuable presence, and with the hope of meeting you at the future events, I declare this international conference closed. I wish that your research and thought paths will always be bright, dynamic, and inspiring. Thank you very much. Dr. Kolami. Dr. Reza Kolami.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
I would like to thank all of you, especially Professor Muhammad Asghari and all the professors, philosophers who had a presentation in our conference. As Professor, please, as Professor Asghari said, I think the conference reached to main part of its aim. This conference showed clearly that we need to expand philosophical dialogues among who have criticisms and new ideas or theories. Because of Iran's philosophical background, Iranian universities, especially Tabriz University for a special history in philosophy, Islamic philosophy, Iranian philosophy, and modern philosophy, are ready to create good grounds for continue these philosophical dialogues in the future, and we are ready in Iranian Wisdom House to contribute with Tabriz University for organizing other conferences in these critical problems. In the conference, all of the professors had accepted that we are facing the critical circumstance and we encounter with human being crisis. The crisis is human being. This is very critical, I think. Today, many critical problems introduced by our lecturers, but I think many of our lecturers insist on digital, industrial, and artificial intelligence. Of course, some of our lecturers talk about democracy, talk about relationship between individuals in global societies, but I think all the professors accepted that the digital, industrial, and AI are two main issues in now and in the future, and we should focus on these two problems and issues. And of course, you know exactly that under the digital, industrial, and artificial intelligence, there are lots of questions and dilemmas which we should focus on them. I think this is very important that we can continue our discussions about digital, industrial, and AI in the future, and I suggest Professor Muhammad Asghari for planning a particular conference about AI in the future. The time is over. Thank you for your attention. See you in other conference. Have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you very much. I hope we will hold the second conference about future of the world. And thank you for all. Goodbye.